Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. Trevor Brown, chairman of Deloitte, is with us in studio. That's his chairman not yet for a year, Trevor. Deloitte's got an interesting policy, though, 3-year terms.
It is quite short, yeah. But I think what generally can happen is you can be re-elected for a further term and then a further term after that. So you can have 9 years.
Is that an international requirement?
No, it's governed by our partnership agreement, and it's something we feel should be entrenched. We have rotation of leadership. So, in fact, the chief executive officer can only be in a term of 4 years, and then he can follow that up with a 3-year term.
But you're pretty young to be a chairman. One often thinks of chairman, you got the grey hair, but the chairman being guys in their 60s and maybe 70s, perhaps even older now. You're still in your early 50s?
Early 50s, yeah. I guess that is a bit young, but it's quite a young profession. We find that the average age of the partnership doesn't really change that much, and in fact it's around about mid-40s. Hasn't really changed over the last 20 years or so. So it is quite unusual to have a young chairman at 51. There have been 61s and so on, but 51 is what I am, yeah.
Your attraction to the profession, Warren Buffett says accountancy is the language of business. So you've got to understand accounting before you can understand business. Is that what brought you in?
I think I was brought into it in a very naive way, actually. I was given a recommendation by one of my brother's parents that I should think about looking into accounting, and also I did an aptitude test at the school I attended, and I was actually pretty set on becoming an engineer. Thank goodness I didn't, because I don't think I'd have been a very good engineer. But what actually happened was the aptitude test came out that I should do accountancy first, pharmaceutical second, and engineering they type of threw in as a third, just to keep my interests up. So that was quite an interesting revelation to me, accountancy. I didn't even do accountancy at school, so I knew very little about it. And we weren't in the situation from a familial point of view that I could go to university and study full time. So what happened was I went the old way. In those days you could do that. You could become an article clerk straight out of school. So that's what I chose to do.
So you joined Deloitte at 18?
Yeah.
In East London?
No, in Johannesburg. So didn't move out of my parents' home and caught the bus, and I didn't have a car at that stage. Caught the bus into Norwich Union in Commissioner Street in those days, and basically completed my articles of clerkship in 1984 when all of the offices were split out into small business units, and I was still not qualified yet because I was doing university at the same time as doing my articles. And we split into Sandton office, into Parktown office, into Johannesburg office, and Benoni, and it was all small business units, which was, if you remember rightly, the flavour of the 80s. So that was what Deloitte chose to do.
Where does East London come from? I saw that in your CV.
Yeah, I was admitted to the partnership in East London. I was quite young when I became a partner. So I guess they didn't know what to do with me. So to wheel me into Barlow Rand, as it was then called, and sign audit opinions as a pretty young partner, I think would have been probably inappropriate. So the office down in East London was two-partner, and the partner who I was taking over from was retiring early, and he out of his own volition. And so I took his position, reported into another guy called Eric Tiltman. And it was a great couple of years. In fact, I was supposed to be down there for longer than I was, but with the firms merging, Deloitte merged with Pim Garby in that time, I came back to Johannesburg then.
And you stuck with the auditing side pretty much all the way?
Well, not really. Certainly auditing and CA was where I started and went through. And as an audit partner to start off with, but I went into leadership in the firm, into operational leadership quite early, when I was about 35, I guess, and really got involved in leading the audit division and people more so than the actual auditing expressing an opinion on a client. That's actually come around a little bit in the circle because I'm now back into auditing, but certainly for 13 years on Exco of the firm, I held a whole lot of different positions, and one was clients and markets, which was really outside of auditing. It transcended the whole firm, so from consulting, tax and risk advisory and corporate finance as well as audit.
Bidvest?
Well, Bidvest was something which happened 5 years ago for Deloitte. We had an opportunity to propose for Bidvest, and Grant Geelink, the CEO of Deloitte at the time, said, this is one we really need to win. And what he asked me to do was come out of, in inverted commas, retirement, and please put my hand to the wheel to lead the Bidvest audit. So we went ahead with that from the point of view of the proposal, and then we won it. So which was very, very good for us from a firm point of view. We then won more of the group over the last year or so, and now it's a very big crown jewel of the audit.
And did you work much with Brian Joffe?
Before?
Well, once you took over at
I work with
the
Brian.
Bidvest audit.
I work with Brian on a regular basis.
Interesting insight, perhaps, into what makes his mind tick.
Well, lots of things make his mind tick. He's a wonderful person to work with and to watch in action. He's got a different way of approaching business and a different way of approaching the world, I think. And it's a pleasure to be alongside him as he makes decisions. Obviously, from an audit point of view, I've got to be independent of that. I've got to be a trusted business advisor on the one hand, and I've also got to be fiercely independent on the other. But yeah, we have a good relationship. I think he would say that too. And I think we've both got to know each other a lot better over 5 years.
It's an interesting position that you're in, because you get to look behind the curtains, under the drawers, as it were, of businesses that succeed, like a Bidvest, and those that don't succeed. I'm not sure how close you were to the whole LeisureNet issue, but that hurt Deloitte's reputation a great deal. Was there anything that, as a firm, you took out of that, which you've been able to apply to not have those reputational risks rising again?
Yeah, LeisureNet was a bit of a tragedy for us, the way it planned out or played out. Because at any one point in time, whilst we might have been on the front page of every newspaper, I think it was to make news about it. We never actually paid out any money as a result of any claims against us. So, and I think all the people who were involved on the LeisureNet audit, this was actually while I was the audit leader, acted very, very well from the point of view of Deloitte. So the audit partner, the whole team, the whole chain of command, I think, did very well. It was most unfortunate that we had our name on the front page making news rather than actually doing anything dramatically wrong.
So what happened? How come you didn't pick up the issues there?
Well, we did pick up the issues, and I think that's the thing that was levelled at us was a very small allegation that there was contingent liabilities that weren't necessarily disclosed in the annual financial statements at the time. And without going into a great deal of detail, those matters were discussed at board level, as I understand it, at audit committee level as well, and the decision taken not necessarily to disclose them. And then when LeisureNet started getting itself into perhaps some difficulties with regard to raising finance for their expansion plans overseas, that was when there was type of questions: where were the auditors? How did they not know that LeisureNet was not going to be overextended and so on? Which I think was a little bit of an unfair question. In fact, one of the directors of Bidvest Group is a guy called Nigel Payne. And Nigel did a full and thorough investigation of the LeisureNet situation and actually lectured in public on his findings. And I think what came out of that was the non-executive directors and the auditors, for that matter, from his perspective, were certainly perhaps unjustifiably brought through the mill. And,
well, everyone looks for someone to blame, don't they?
And insurance companies and settlements and so on. Yeah, one has to be careful with this stuff. It's it's hard.
But what is the auditor supposed to be? I'll give you an example here at MoneyWeb. We had a crook for a financial director who stole a few million rand, created his own fictitious invoices, and eventually was discovered after about a year that he was busy, he was at it. We went back to the auditors and said, how come you couldn't find this?
Yeah.
And the answer that they gave was, to any business owner, would be unsatisfactory, I guess. Well, we didn't know, or we can't really catch crooks. Is that the way that auditors play it now? And where does your responsibility begin and end?
Well, it's a subject in itself, but the overall responsibility we have is to opine on the fairness of the annual financial statement. So in the case of a massive company, there is some very big numbers, and if they were to change by 1 or 2 million, you wouldn't notice it in the rounding. So the whole issue of materiality does come into it. We can't redo every transaction of a company. It would cost us a lot of money, and it would cost the company far too much money to duplicate its efforts. So one has to have a whole bunch of controls and processes in place, which is the responsibility of the company. And then it's almost like a combined model of assurance. You are getting assurance from your management accounts, from looking at them, from your controls, from maybe internal audit. And external audit is just another cog of that. So the external auditor really is there to come in and have a look at the controls, have a look at the balances that are in the general ledger. Say, do they actually represent the assets that the company owns, and do they actually represent the liabilities that they say they are?
So if you don't have a good internal audit function, don't expect the external auditors to bail you out.
I wouldn't say that. Internal audit and external audit are part of the chain. I don't think it's one or the other. I think good corporate governance today says we should have internal audit in big companies and big entities. But it's not a necessity. So just to finish on it, I think the assurance comes from the auditor applying his mind and judgment to a whole lot of risks and to a whole lot of areas where the numbers could be wrong. And he applies tests accordingly and hopefully comes to an opinion. So to discover a person who's in an authoritative position like your financial director was, you said he was the FD, I think it's quite tricky because he's able then to actually override those controls. He's able to write out checks to himself and tell the bookkeeper where to debit the expense, if you like. And that is tricky. Well, I've had a situation in the 90s where we uncovered a 50 million rand fraud, which, as it turned out, was perpetrated by the chairman and the CEO. Now, very, very difficult, but we did find that, which was comforting.
Bit of luck, maybe.
No, well, I think we did some innovative audit technique tests. In fact, in those days,
which you're not sharing.
Well, computer audits. Nowadays, you can use a computer to do lots of things, and data analytics is the way to go.
Trevor, you've got a strong faith, and you really have a. Is that part of the decision to do what you do? Is ethics and integrity and those kind of values important to you?
Very important. My personal value system is something which has always been a compass, and it's great that the auditing profession and Deloitte have very, very congruent values.
But do you ever get frustrated by what you see in the business environment? Because it does appear to many people that values, in fact, are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I guess it is frustrating. And I think from our perspective, we like to be realistic, maybe idealistic on being the cornerstone of corporate governance. That's what we want to try and be, and certainly that fits with my personal values. So yeah, I mean, one gets frustrated with corruption, with dishonesty, and in fact the profession is there to help weed that out. I'm not saying it's always going to weed it out, but it'll help.
But it's promising to see that auditors have taken a tougher line, if you like, over the last few years. There's much more conversation about corruption. There's much more disclosure from the professionals compared with what there might have been 20, 30 years ago.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the overall impact of just Enron in 2001 had a massive impact on on the world. We lost one of the big five as a result of Enron. So certainly from a perspective of looking at how we did things, I think that was very, very valuable. I think there was an overreaction to it sometimes as well. So we've had a plethora of regulatory issues that now have come to fore and we've got to follow. And I think some of that is excellent, but not all of it. I think some of it's paint by numbers and rules, which I don't think is necessarily what we want to do. We would like to audit to principles and guidelines. But I think you're right. I think the auditing profession has had more of a voice as a result of some of the changes in corporate governance. With just the advent of audit committees, that was something we didn't talk about 15, 20 years ago. And now every company has to have an audit committee, which is very rigorous, very well run if it's properly appointed, and if it takes its responsibilities seriously, which most of them do around our market. I think it's a very, very valuable mechanism.
It's good to see as well, as a South African in this profession, how highly it rates globally the World Economic Forum's competitiveness report, showing that auditing, in fact, in this country is the highest in the world. Is that it seems a surprise to outsiders, is it to you?
I think there's something which is quite unique about the qualification, if I can just talk about that for a bit. I mean, the CASA is something which, Chartered Accountant South Africa, is something which is unbelievably prized. I'm not saying because I am one that it's the best in the world, but it's up there amongst the best in the world from a qualification point of view. Above perhaps the Americans, certainly up there with England and Wales. Just to pick two markets. And I think what's great about our profession in this country is it always has been leading edge in following the latest trends in accounting. So certainly we were adopting international financial reporting standards before any other major country in the world. So the Americans are still on US GAAP. So South Africa adopted IFRS a long time ago. And I think that same thing applies with auditing standards. We're ahead of the curve on that, and I think it's good to be a leader.
Chartered Accountant, Chairman of Deloitte, Trevor Brown.